We are live with every other week interrupted, I would say. We've got the wonderful April Peregrino joining us, and she has been traveling every other week for almost 2 years, not between working as a pharmacist and traveling intensely. So we're going to hear all about it. Thank you for joining us, April.
Thanks, Stefan. Hi, everyone.
So talk about how you had what your vocation is and how you had this idea to put together. 'Cause this is very different than the location independent, the laptop on the beach type type thing that people dream of in a lot of the blogs. You've created your own special lifestyle.
I'm a retail pharmacist and I work graveyard shift or night shift. So I work 7 nights in a row and then I'm off 7 days in a row. So my shift is from 9 p.m. to 7:15 a.m. Essentially working 72 hours in the week and then I'm off. And I've taken advantage of the week off by traveling. Lots of Americans only have 1 week off of vacation per year. So I try to take advantage of this special schedule by traveling every other week.
And is this a normal schedule available to pharmacists, or is this something that you dreamed up?
No, one of my stores, no, it's only available to those that work night shift, and my store is one of the very few ones that are open 24 hours.
All right. And do you talk with any other people who work these shifts, and what do they do on their week? Do they just think you're total madness? I think they're probably Netflix and sleeping for 7 days.
They are actually. So before, when there were many more 24-hour pharmacies, they were doing Netflix and sleeping. A lot of my friends now have kids, so they're not many overnighters now, but they all have kids, so they're busy creating beautiful lives. So I just thought, well, there's only one life, there's only one time to see these things, so why not?
Now, I would think that you've seen it all without having to leave the pharmacy. So we'll talk about first the world coming to you before you going out to the world. So you're in Chicago, and I just imagine, I mean, your people are clearly in need if they're visiting an overnight pharmacy. So talk about that experience. What has it taught you about people? What travel skills have you learned?
Well, since Chicago is a big city and I'm exposed to different kinds of uh, nationalities or ethnicities, races. So it's always been a learning curve. And sometimes in different neighborhoods, you get different types of people. So, um, but right now I work in a more Latinx neighborhood. So primarily I just only have to speak Spanish. And I've realized over the years of working there that the pharmacist is not only free, but
Mhm.
they respect the pharmacist so much because in their own countries they can easily get medicine,
Oh, okay.
whereas they usually want amoxicillin, which in Mexico or other Latin countries you can easily get over the counter in the pharmacy. You just have to
Oh,
ask the pharmacist. But unfortunately, with the laws in the United States, they're more regulated. So I have to tell them, I'm so sorry, but you have to go see a doctor, or you have to go to the emergency room. And unfortunately, because my patients are on the lower socioeconomic scale, they don't have regular doctors, so they wind up going to the emergency room, which is why we are busy at night because after they go to the emergency room, they come to see me.
well, there's so much of a discussion about the American healthcare system that I think we'll have to avoid, but the not for avoiding the subject so much, but just we would need to book a half day of exploration of this topic. But there is the very real health, the global pandemic that we're all hearing so many different opinions, and there's a lot of opinions that we've all fashioned ourselves into experts without being experts, and the stock market is up, so people say it must be over, but I don't think the virus knows about the stock prices. So just talk about how you, just talk about how and you did take a road trip. So I want you to, as much detail as you can, walk through your decision to take this road trip over Memorial Day.
Sure. So my friend and I decided that we were going stir crazy like everybody else in their home, and as travelers, we needed a bit of a break. He works for an airline, but did not feel comfortable with flying just yet. I also was not sure about flying. Preferably, I probably wouldn't mind flying one flight, but it seems with the amount of flights that are getting canceled, you may have to do a layover. So I wasn't comfortable with that. So we wanted to go, I wanted to go somewhere that was less, that was more isolated. So not Florida. Um, and we were deciding between car and flight. So car is obviously more of a controllable factor. So, but from Chicago to South Dakota or North Dakota, it's a bit of a drive. But we had roughly about 5 days. And then the next discussion was between car camping, tent camping, or hotel cabin accommodation. Still, I felt very uncomfortable with cabin or hotel accommodations because working in a hot COVID neighborhood right now, I potentially did not want to be a vector for some poor hotel employee or some unsuspecting hotel employee. And then they would eventually give it to their family members or their friends, and then it would spread all through the state or wherever. So we felt a little bit more comfortable with car camping and tent camping. Lastly, we decided that we would bring most of our food. My friend and I have been both to Burning Man, so we're very familiar with the extreme camping, pack in, pack out, leave no trace principle. And so we didn't have enough food, but I also felt comfortable with going through a drive-through McDonald's or drive-through some kind of fast food that would limit our interactions with people. We wouldn't be in the restaurant. And you're also not impinging on the supplies for locals. So early in the pandemic, everyone was fighting about water and toilet paper. I did not want to be that person fighting with a local with not having enough, going down to the last liter of water. So we brought enough water, and then I felt, well, in gas stations, you can always buy water. So rather than a Walmart or somewhere else. So my friend and I started out in Chicago and then drove to La Crosse, Wisconsin. So that's about 4 or 5 hour drive. We started on Thursday night after he got off work. And that was one of my first meals, was a McDonald's meal. And I haven't eaten fast food or regularly, I haven't eaten fast food in years. So I think I've eaten enough McDonald's to last me 2 or 3 years.
What's your McDonald's order? What's the virus April McDonald's pick?
It's a 20-piece chicken McNugget and fries, and then maybe a Coke. But I try to switch it up throughout the 3 days, okay?
That's pretty much my order. So if I had, but it's been years. Other than like the ice cream cones they have in McDonald's in Asia that are so wonderful. But let's continue. We're in La Crosse, and you're sleeping in the car then?
So we slept in the car, and my friend knew that if you slept in a Walmart parking lot, it's free and no one bothers you.
Okay.
So I guess there's this just known thing. I didn't know that. And he said when he walked in the morning to buy something, the bathroom was open. So that was surprising to me because in Chicago we were like, no, you can't use the bathroom here. We don't know what you have. So yeah, at my store we closed off the bathrooms only to the employees because we didn't know what anybody had. And we, for a long time people were not wearing the mask seriously. So we just did not want to have that sort of situation.
You're implying they are now. Were people wearing masks anywhere you went?
So this is actually very interesting to me because I remember that when we were in Wisconsin, the drive-through employee was not wearing a mask. But then we went to Minnesota, they were wearing the mask. And then I think we had one more opportunity through South Dakota, and they were not wearing the mask. So it So it was very interesting, just culture wise, between the states, what either protocol dictated or what they felt like doing at work.
After a lot of bad news, there's some good news about my home state.
So to continue on, so if anyone's interested in quirky destinations, there's the world's largest 6-pack of beer in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Mm.
I've also stopped through Austin, Minnesota, which I didn't even know there was an Austin in Minnesota. I just thought there was one in Texas. There is the Spam Museum.
Home of Cornwall, yeah.
It was not open, but you could walk around. It's very cute. And then we got to South Dakota. So that night we slept in a tent on a campground in the Badlands. There were a number of cars around, but everyone was pretty much social distancing. There was one bathroom, but I didn't feel like it was overcrowded. People were being very cautious about it. There was hand sanitizer in the bathroom. There was toilet paper in the bathroom. So it was well stocked. And then after that, we drove around through the state. We also made a trip to this place called Carhenge in Nebraska. And there was a guy that was from Alliance, Nebraska, went to the UK to work, came back, and decided to erect Stonehenge, but made out of cars instead of rocks in his hometown of Alliance, Nebraska. So that's actually really cool. And then as we drove through the state, we also went to North Dakota and finished off there at Theodore Roosevelt Park, National Park. So
talk about Theodore Roosevelt National Park. I've heard it's one that's very underrated, and travelers often say it holds its own against some of the more famous ones to the west.
I think that I may have not seen this had my friend and I not decided that we both wanted to see all national parks during our road trip. But it was really beautiful as we were driving it. Some of these states are not the most varied in their landscape. And so when we got close to the park, it was very clear that this was beautiful. And so I started sort of veering off the road and looking, which my friend was not happy about. But it's beautiful. It is similar to Badlands, but this time of year there was more grass, so it was wonderful. And we found sort of this off-road campsite in the park. There were no cars there, by the way. There were maybe 3 or 4 cars that we had passed in the national park. And when we camped we car camped that night, in the morning we were surrounded by bison.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was so magical. I did not even want to roll down the window to scare them. So the car was a little bit foggy. So I just had the car windows were foggy. So I had to wipe it down and just stare out through the window. And it was just magical. I'm never going to see that again. So I found that made my trip, just seeing bison. I mean, I'm a city girl, so I would never see bison in Chicago. Hiking ways, the main part was closed off. But driving through, you can still drive through, see beautiful sights. So I really enjoyed it. I don't know if I would stay more than 2 days, but definitely a night was magical.
I was just pulling up to get a concept in my head. It said the Yellowstone averages around 4 million visitors a year, and Theodore Roosevelt is about 600,000. So there's a huge difference. So let's talk about the other sites. You saw Badlands, you saw Theodore Roosevelt, and you're now suddenly going to visit all the national parks as one of your goals in your bio. So talk about what else you saw on that trip.
Well, we went through Custer National Park. So after that, I think Badlands, and there's also Wind Cave National Park. So the cave was actually closed,
Sure.
but driving through was really pretty. And then that led into Custer State Park. And again, there were so many bison. It was ridiculous. I was enthralled, entranced. I couldn't believe it. So to have that experience again and to be woken up in Theodore Roosevelt National Park was icing on the cake. So
Mm.
I just thought, this is mind blowing. You'll never see this much bison again. And I felt like I was in a safari in Custer State Park, because as we were driving, there was this herd of bison that came, and I said, "Oh, wait, you can't keep driving through this. You need to stop." And it felt very similar to like if we were in India or something like that, where you have to stop for that many animals because
Yeah.
it's magical. You're respecting nature and wildlife, and I really loved it. Um,
And
and
considering any one of them could walk up over your car, and these are not the marmot migration.
yeah, that was wonderful. And then we also went to Crazy Horse and Mount Rushmore, and that's where all the people were. They were all there, and I thought, this state is, I have not seen many people in this state. And then all of a sudden they're all at Mount Rushmore, where it felt alarming actually, because being in quarantine for about 2.5 months when you're with your partner, and then all of a sudden there's so many people, it felt like, around. And I felt like people were respectful and social distancing, but I just felt like there's too many people here. And because they had started construction, there was only one viewing area in the park, it seemed
Okay.
like. So it was almost like, okay, this looks great. I'm going to take a photo and now I'm going to leave. I don't care if the parking costs $10. I'm just leaving. This is too much for me.
I think that's an important point of we're going to have to be realistic in our upcoming travels, that for the foreseeable future, that there's going to be things that it's just, if it doesn't feel right, you just have to find a way to take a step back. And Michael's asking about Custer State Park. Did you feed the burros?
No.
Oh, I guess we need to feed the burros. And Ted is adding that Theodore Roosevelt apparently has a park where International Peace Garden between the North Dakota and Canada border, where you could roam freely without immigration. So we'll see if, I wonder if that's the only way to sort of be in Canada for the foreseeable time. Okay, so you took this trip. It seems like you took it very seriously, thoughtfully. What would it take for the next step of those of us that do not find it appealing to sleep in our car overnight? So the traditional road trip, what would you have to see in the health situation to feel comfortable to staying in hotels, eating in restaurants, but again, as a road trip model?
I think that if you're already practicing social distancing and you're just mindful of wearing your mask everywhere, I think you're already on the right path. I think that it's unrealistic to think that your hotel room or the tables that you eat on are completely clean. So if you feel like you need more control, I would highly suggest bringing disinfectant wipes or even baby wipes with you. Um, and if you're a female, that would probably very easily fit in one of your purses. So I think that's just
One of your
simple.
purses. Are you a multi-purse person?
No, 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 I'm not. But I'm thinking of, sometimes there's moms and they have a purse and then they have a diaper bag, and then, the husband either has a backpack or something. So like one of your bags can hold these
I
things,
could get
right?
in trouble here, but I've always wondered about, because I used to live in New York, and there'd be the weekend commuters heading to Long Island, and it would always be the huge purse, the even huger tote, and the luggage, and that they're not the every other week backpackers, but I always wondered that huge tote must weigh about 100 pounds. I don't know how managing that.
They probably had to carry all their hair products and their hair instruments, the blow dryer and the straightener or whatever they need.
So okay, so pack wipes in whatever size carrier you have, and what else for this road trip?
Definitely gloves. I mean, I don't always have disposable gloves. What I have are just winter mittens. So I just feel if I'm not touching things with my hands, then that's fine. Or if you have hand sanitizer, just bring that along too. So it's if you're traveling from your own car, this is your car. You're going to feel a lot safer. If
Mhm.
you're flying and then renting a car, then I think just the basic things that you can do is bring some wipes or because I do know that they're in short supply. So nowadays, I don't know how carry-on is going on because it seems like there are more limitations with carry-on. So if you have to pack your suitcase, I would definitely pack some in there. And then the first thing you would do is probably just wipe down the steering wheel and just maybe some of the areas that you might be frequently touching, things that you might not even think about, like the radio, knobs, or just like the door handles. I think that's just very
Some people,
simple
they put
stuff.
their arm over the passenger seat or something that, yeah, they might not think to wipe that down, but
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea as well.
yeah. Huh. When would you, it's all guesswork, but do you think later this summer you'd be comfortable with such a trip, or how are you thinking about what you'll do the rest of the year?
I am actually a little bit more comfortable. My friend and I are also discussing going to Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming via Denver, and again renting a car. So this would be the first time I'm flying since the pandemic hit, and I made it very clear that I just want to do one flight because I don't really know about two flights just
Yeah,
yet.
hub for United, yeah, out of Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then also when you think about some of these more isolated states, when in the beginning of the pandemic, the rental car companies were closed at a certain time. So you may be just stuck without accommodation or some control of what you want your accommodation to be. So Denver's a big enough hub where their airport rental company would be open
Hmm.
24 hours, right? No matter if your flight is delayed or what's going on.
Hmm.
And then so I feel comfortable with that. Internationally, for some reason I feel more comfortable on a longer flight than like a shorter flight. And maybe it's because I feel that people that are flying longer, especially maybe Asians, because they're used to wearing the mask, are like more conscious about the things that they need to do on an airplane. Whereas, depending on which state you live in and what your ideas are about masks, people are not always serious about that. So I think that might be why I'm a little bit more hesitant to fly within the states right now.
You're so generous to the unruly Americans. I think the only chance we'll be on a flight anytime in the next months will be a nonstop, so no connection Asian carrier, if the country will have us. But
Yeah, if the country will have us, the if if the Chinese carriers will take us, there's so many reasons why we will not be traveling this year.
and talk a little bit about just setting aside the virus, but in-flight health, travel health, some of the tips, vitamins, the everyday stuff that at least can, of course, not prevent coronavirus, but the travel schedule you have done has been the end of travel for many a management consultant. So how do you, for over 2 years, how do you maintain this every other week, 7 days on the road?
To be fair, I don't really do too much on my week on, so I will work out, but I usually sleep, and that's just how I get my energy. And then when you think about it, I'm working night shift, so I'm essentially on Asian time zone, or it's only a few hours difference from Africa and European time zone. So as long as I get enough sleep on my flight, I'm ready to go once we hit the ground. Um, but the things that I've generally wore on a flight pre-pandemic were a scarf. So I think that's a really great way to cover your face. If you nowadays, it's I'm assuming the mask is required. So mask plus another barrier wouldn't be a bad idea. Now I'll probably consider carrying wipes with me, and generally, I've just tried to eat rather healthy and work out because I feel like that's going to give you more immunity. I know people have asked about vitamins. So, personally, for me, I love Airborne, which is this effervescent tablet that you put in water, and it's a big dose of vitamins. And it works, it really does work for me if you know your body well enough to think, something is slightly off. I need to make sure like I don't ruin my trip. So I've taken that. There's also emergency, which is not just vitamin C, but there are other vitamins in it. There's also echinacea or zinc. But when people think about an overdose of vitamins, these vitamins are water soluble, so you're not going to overdose on these kind of vitamins because you can just urinate it out. You're more worried about the fat soluble ones that stay in your system longer, but they're generally not going to be an airborne. So your fat soluble ones are the most popular one is vitamin D. So you're not going to take a lot of that, but everything else is water soluble. So you're just gonna, like I said, you're just going to urinate it out.
You're implying a lot of common sense, and a lot of people that aren't necessarily. None of us seem to be acting with common sense. People might take a bottle full of anything.
Well, I mean, I guess if you're Russian, you have your own way of doing it. So you probably just drink the vodka and it's just going to kill everything in your system. And that's what you believe. So, and I see nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, that might be what gets us, at least get them through it all.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna go entirely from now on to the happy stuff. We're pretending the virus doesn't exist. So you were on your march. You were almost at 150 UN. That's an aggressive pace. Let's talk about how you plan these trips. So again, each trip is very clearly defined. 7 days is the max. So how are you trip planning?
So a lot of times I would be planning my trips a few months in advance at work during my lunch break. So there were times where there was one time where I was talking to 6 different fixers from 6 different countries, just
Hmm.
organizing the travels because I'm the type of traveler that takes a lot of photos, but not necessarily wants to post everything. I really want to be in the moment, even though I'm taking photos. I want to meet the locals. And I also don't want to be planning the next trip. So I'll probably plan it in bulk or just have an idea of where I wanted to go. And a lot of times in the last few years, it has to deal with visas. So, and carefully planning those visa applications and sending them out at a right time.
Hmm. Talk about, I think this might be about 2 years back, where you were working on the Venezuela visa with all kinds of efforts that we were talking about. So talk about the Venezuela visa experience.
Oh, thank you so much for one bringing it up, and then two giving me the info to apply for a second passport. So back in
Oh, I
2016,
actually forgot about that. I wasn't trying to to feed you some like, oh, say I'm great. So I forgot that I had said about the second passport. Okay.
yeah, you were the one who gave me the information. So
Okay.
again, thank you so much. So back in 2016, I knew I had some time off in the beginning of 2017, early January, and so I thought, oh, maybe I want to go to Venezuela. And I was looking up. I had always wanted to hike Roraima, so I had found a company. Seemed, and this is before things really got bad in Venezuela. So I thought, oh well, this should be safe. I think I should be able to do this. When there was a Venezuelan consulate in Chicago, I went there, and for whatever reason, hold on, let me just think why. Oh, I know. Okay. For whatever, so I went there and I said, okay, I would like to go to Venezuela. I have all the information. Here's my letter of employment from a letter of employment. Everything is set, right? But I said, oh, but I am going to Egypt within 5 weeks. Is it possible for me to drop off the passport and then when I need it, pick it back up and then I'll give it back to you? They said, absolutely not. But if you have a second passport, you can do that. And I thought, oh, well, I do have a second passport, but my Filipino one is not going to be within the requirements for this visa because it expires in March and they needed 3 months validity of the passport by the time I got there. So they said, oh, you could just go to the Filipino embassy. So I did wind up walking over to the consulate that day because they weren't too far from each other. And it was 12 weeks, no rush service. So I thought, oh, well, okay, I can't do this now. So I had read your, I said I had read something that I think maybe Rick Kazarian was interviewing you about. And so you had mentioned you had a second passport. So I messaged you right away saying, like, how do I do this? So you gave me the tools to do that. And I've done it twice since. So thank you. So
It's now
currently,
it's now a longer validity. Is it 4 years? The second one you
it's,
got is,
yes, it's 4 years.
and for those that sound intimidated by it, I mean, talk about that process. It's not a, especially when you live in a city with a passport agency, it's not a difficult thing, but there's not a lot of solid information out there.
There's not. And again, you were so helpful. So what you need to do is apply like you're applying for your first passport. I think it's the same application, or it's the renewal passport application. So I'm pretty sure it's Form 82. So I have to look this up, but I know it's Form 82, but I don't know what it's called. So, and I had just done this earlier this year. So that's why I know this.
Mm,
Um, so you have to prove that you are flying within a destination and the other passport is held up somewhere else, and that destination is within the time frame, so that way you need your passport to enter back into the States. So I think at the time, again, I was flying to Egypt, I needed the passport, but that potential the second passport, or that first passport, would be potentially locked in Venezuela. So when I applied for the second passport, I had to show proof that I had flights for Venezuela and I had flights for Egypt. And I had to tell them the visa process is this long. So I need my passport to come back from Egypt. And so, other than money and the regular requirements, it is pretty easy. But if you don't live in a city where where you can't do this very quickly, I can see this as a big hassle.
mm.
And luckily, I work night shift, so I can do these things during the day and then go, even though it cuts into my sleep. But I got my recent second passport within 2 days. I think I did it on a Friday and then I got it on a Monday.
I think I mentioned about the passport agency. I remember the first time I got one, the way the passport agency works, there's that reception agent that looks to see if your forms are in order, and she was incredibly helpful. She put post-it notes all over my current one and said, "Do not cancel,
That's
do not cancel," because he said so many times they just end up canceling the original passport, and then they're like, "Tough luck." It's like, didn't ask for that.
That's the same that happened to my first passport. Do not cancel all over like the first
Yeah.
passport, and then when you're renewing your second passport, it's the same thing, but they didn't want to see the first passport. So I thought, oh, this is actually much easier.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't renewed a second one. Yeah. No, actually, I did once. Yeah, I've done it. Yeah, it was that process, and yeah, it's a nice advantage to have. And I think the old excuse of saying like, oh, in case Israel stamps my passport, well, they don't stamp the passport anymore. So yeah, as you said, you just need some evidence and a reason in the form letter, and it's a great way to have flexibility. So Venezuela itself, talk about that.
So going back to that story, so I eventually dropped off the paperwork after getting the second passport and waited weeks. Came back from Egypt, still didn't hear anything, and unfortunately, this was the time where we had our election, so I really wasn't sure what was going on because I didn't know if there was some kind of political issue between our government and Venezuela's government.
Mm,
So eventually they told me, so I realized I just applied at the wrong time. And
okay.
so I wound up waiting way longer, had to switch the trip to something else. And then when I came back, they said, "Oh, we called you." And I said, "No, you had not, but that's okay." So I went back to the after my trip, and I think they had told me now 8 weeks instead of 4 or 5 weeks. So
Mm,
when I came back, I said, just checking on this, and they said, "Oh, we tried to contact you, but yeah, it's unfortunately been denied." And I
mm.
said, and I took it personally,
Yeah.
I'm Asian, so like I want to get a straight A. I've never been denied a visa. I said, listen, I've been to North Korea and Iran. You can see this Iranian
Like,
visa here.
what does
Like,
that say about us? That you
what?
didn't say Ireland and
I said, what's wrong? What did I do? And he just said nothing. I think if you have a different passport, you'd have better chances. And I thought, and like that's the time when I had renewed my Filipino one. So I thought, oh well, I'll just so since I have been denied, I haven't applied since because I was afraid that that one denial would be linked to my name, maybe not my passport. But now it's just impossible. I think the latest that I've heard of is that there's an embassy in Ottawa, Canada, that will approve of your visa. But who knows now with the pandemic? So it's actually one of my last sort of, I don't want to say this incorrectly, but dodgy countries. I've been to all the war zones, so after Venezuela, it should be relatively easy in terms of pursuing 193.
while we're in that region, speak to one of your favorites. So Brazil and the Pantanal region.
I really loved Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia. I thought it was so beautiful. Not the Salar itself, because that is very impressive, but
Mm.
unfortunately, with Instagram and social media, you do see a lot of photos of these places. But just the drive from Salar back to Uyuni was so amazing and so remote. And it was one of those things that inspired me to see more beautiful things. It was really impressive. So that I highly recommend. I know a lot of people don't like the cold. You do have to be prepared. I was there for a milestone birthday, so that was
Mm.
at the end of April, beginning of May, and it was still very, very cold. And I've heard their winter is much colder, so that's our summer. And I don't know what to tell you. You just have to be more prepared or more mentally prepared for the cold.
Charles Veely of Most Traveled People popped up in the comments about that Ottawa situation. For those, check out his interview a few weeks ago because he he talked about what is it, FedEx or UPS won't deliver to the Venezuelan embassy in Ottawa if it's shipped from the U.S. So you want to ship it to someone in Ottawa who will then hand deliver it to them because it just his passport got returned to sender due to the interpretation of dealing with the regime by FedEx.
So can I ask, because I know Charles travels a lot, I'm surprised he didn't hand deliver it to the embassy in Ottawa himself.
Now, Charles is good at Zoom bombing, so he might appear on the camera if we start talking to him. So depends what you're want. I'm forgetting it was around Christmas in his story, so from there I think everybody just has to pull up the video and look for bearded Charles Veely interview a few weeks ago, and get more of that story. Oh, he did ask, have you ever purchased yellow ducks in Indonesia? So I take it there's a story there that I'm not privy to.
I have purchased yellow ducks in Indonesia. I had to go on almost a goose chase to find these yellow ducks in Indonesia. There's a hotel chain in Indonesia called Harris Chain, and one of our mutual friends is named Harris, and at the time he was carrying a yellow duck around in photo opportunities, I think in South Ossetia. So we had this idea, Charles and I, to look for a yellow duck to send to Harris while we both stayed in this Harris hotel.
So that's and Harris has popped up in the comments as well.
Hi, Harris!
He's watching as well. There's so many well wishers and fans that have chipped in with the hellos. I couldn't say hi to all of them, but and a few familiar faces from the Filipino travel club. So talk a bit about uh, your heritage and experiences as a bit of an insider, but also a dual identity, if we could phrase it that way. And growing up in the U.S., but going back to the Philippines and family visits, tourist visits.
I'd like to say that one, and not to mention another club, but the Philippine Global Explorers has been a really wonderful thing to have during the pandemic. EPS is wonderful, but then with so many members, I think a lot of the posts get to be, or a lot of the comments get to be so much volume that it's hard for me to read through them. And there's been some wonderful questions on EPS and wonderful posts, just seeing what people are thinking. But it's been really nice with PGE, Philippine Global Explorers, that to have this community that where when I was growing up, was one of the few Asian kids in my neighborhood, to now find all these extreme travelers that look like me. So to go back to that, my parents are from the Philippines. I was born in the States, and my parents valued education, so there was not much emphasis on travel. And we would only go back to the Philippines for family events. So I only went back to the Philippines 2 or 3 times when I was a child. But my parents were big in our culture, but at the time, it's sort of similar to now, where I think the consensus was it was better to assimilate and be more Americanized than
Mhm.
to display that you were something else.
Mhm.
So my parents spoke their dialect at home, and my mom spoke Tagalog on the phone. So I understand most of it. It does. I am very rusty now, but if I'm placed in a situation where most of it is Tagalog or most of it is Waray, my parents' language, I can pick up most of the conversation. It's really helpful when there's one English word thrown in, so I can get the context of it. But seeing that uh, growing up in the States almost made me so different than seeing my family in the Philippines, because it was very clear as I got older that things that I took for granted in the Western area of Western areas were maybe considered more of luxury in the Philippines. Just simply the bathroom situation.
Fantastic. And let's see. My native language is Waray.
Waray, yeah.
And which region would that be then?
So that's the Visayas region.
Oh, fantastic. So that's, I think that's Odette. I think is that Odette? Oh no, Zarian is mentioning that. Sorry,
Yeah.
the Facebook comments rolled so a little slowly through in our video interface. So we've got a question of from Odette. Did you have travel bad experience with agents pretending they are sincere but turned sour?
Ooh, I think a
Question.
lot of people had this issue with Syria.
Okay.
So, I luckily visited Syria in January this year, but I had been trying, much like you, Stefan, for at least a year, if not more, to get a visa. I tried with one person. I tried with Basil. Is it Basil? Basil?
Oh, yeah, no.
Basil. Okay. And then several others. And luckily, Giada was just Gaida was amazing. But Basil was the one that was the least. Uh, I I don't want to say he wasn't honest, because I did get my money back, but I think there was. I think a lot of people from EPS suffered from that. So I personally got my money back, but this is how I got my money back. So Basil had asked us to Venmo his friend
Mhm,
the deposit, which I think was $500.
mhm,
After contacting Basil several times through WhatsApp, he said he had surgery and
mhm,
whatnot. And I think I was pretty lenient about it. I mean, as a healthcare worker, I understand you don't want to deal with all this stuff if you really did have surgery. Um, so he just kept promising the money and promising the money. And finally, I decided, well, you know what? I had remembered that I had paid his friend through Venmo. So I requested a refund and then made it public. And so after I made it public, he must have told his friend must have told Basil, and Basil refunded me the money right away on PayPal.
okay.
So of course, I told the other two the other three girls that were scheduled for us to go at the same time. It's like, hey, I got my money back. Maybe we should do it now too.
Congrats to that. And Charles is asking back to the Philippines, I assume the Tujuh Archipelago, Tudjuh.
Yes,
Have you been?
that's not in the Philippines.
Okay, I don't know. It was in the Philippine discussion. I've never heard of it. So
It's in Indonesia.
Indonesia. Okay, all right.
Charles
Have you
knows
been?
that. Yes.
Oh, you didn't. I'm just guessing. So it was nestled in a bunch of Philippine comments. So that's my mistake. But have you been? And
Yes.
okay, and the experience.
Was wonderful.
And what is it then? Because I clearly know nothing about it.
So the Tujuh Archipelago is, I don't want to say 1 or 2 points on Nomad Mania. It's definitely a point on most traveled people. So,
You're only allowed to have 2 points on most traveled people if no one lives there, right?
one for getting there and one for seeing the locals, right? Yeah. But it is in Indonesia in a very remote area, and there is this beautiful resort and relatively like low maintenance for the other resort that's very popular or has gotten more press about it. But it's called Non-Cat Island or Non-Cat Island Resort, and there's just a bunch of beach cottages, and it's really really lovely. The owner there is amazing. He is Indonesian, spent a lot of time in Australia. I think I'm pretty sure he worked for an airline and had to do like gift services or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. Something about duty free, but his hospitality was on par to anything I've stayed in, like really nice hotels. So I'd highly recommend that resort to anybody who's looking for going to Tujuh Archipelago, going to Anambas Islands in Indonesia.
And this is for ticking a box. This is for diving. What brought you there?
I was traveling with a friend that wanted to go there.
So it's the friend ticking a box.
Yes, exactly.
So which boxes are you ticking? You mentioned most traveled people, Nomad Mania, TCC. You're on every list. You want to complete them all, or what are your goals?
No, I think in the beginning when I was in pharmacy school, the first list I had found was TCC. So I thought, oh, okay. But then I realized as I started traveling more, um, that the UN list was relatively more attainable. So for right now, that's the list I'm focused on. Nomad Mania and MTP are so comprehensive that it feels like it's almost impossible to finish those. So if I go to a place and something is able to be ticked off, I'll make my list current and I'll tick it off. But I'm not going to these places just to tick things off.
And so let's assume that the travel resumes. I don't know, by this time next year. You're approaching 150. What is your goal? How would you structure it if things were back to the 2019 levels?
So I just want to point out. So when I was stuck in the pandemic, or I was on a 3-week trip, Trump had just declared that he was not letting European flights back in. That was Wednesday night. I was supposed to fly for Thursday morning, and I thought, well, if he's not letting anyone in for a month, I might as well just go because this is a 3-week trip. I'll figure it out when I get home. Which obviously after traveling, 1 week and clearly days into Mauritania, I realized, oh, this is getting more serious. I actually need to get home. So my 150th was supposed to be Nigeria on that 3-week trip. I had specifically gone to the DC embassy to fill out the biometrics. I had never been to DC before. So I had a lovely Uber driver that had, after I had told him that, he decided he was going to take me around, wait for me at the embassy, and then take me back to the airport. This was like a very basic in and out trip because I wanted to get the biometrics done. I had to go back, and I was scheduled to work. Luckily, I had called off, so they were able to find somebody to work for me. But this was my lifestyle. I was like, I remember I think I came back from, I was in Mauritius, scheduling my DC appointment and then going to the DC appointment, thinking I had to work the next night. So if I can get back to that level or just even to one international trip this year, I'm really hoping Nigeria will open its borders because this visa, even though it's good for 2 years, I've heard different stories about you're supposed to use it at this certain time frame or else your visa is going to expire. So I'm pretty sure by this point my visa is potentially expired, but I don't really want to go through this experience again of flying to DC or some
I
other
wasn't even
place where
aware
there's,
of this. This is a recent process, the biometrics.
yeah, I guess so because I don't know. Um, well, I was going on a lupine tour, so they definitely had given me all the paperwork. And I
Yeah.
know on EPS, people had mentioned if you have a business visa, you can bypass all this stuff.
Okay.
So, but I was getting a proper tourist visa, so I guess that might be
Yeah, and I
the
mean, I
new
know
protocol.
when I went, what, 4 or 5 years ago, everything had changed that year to be a totally different system than the year before. And at that point, it was like I was in Ghana, and they always used to give the visas, and then they wouldn't. And then it was go back to New York where I was living, and then do the online application, and then after waiting like 2 weeks, the three of us all picking up visas that day, everybody had an error in our visa, and and they're like, "Oh, we'll come back next week and maybe we'll have fixed them." And this is no, fix the darn things now. And so an hour later, they fortunately did fix all the different errors, and it's like they issued them expired already, or totally wrong dates. So it wasn't the. I can imagine it's still a process in flux.
So maybe you have some ideas of how maybe if somebody notices it's expired, that I can sort of bypass.
I've called in other forums the best welcome of any immigration officer I've ever had of any country, honestly, was in Nigeria. So I don't want to perpetuate the negative stereotypes, but that visa was a challenge. So I see another comment about biometrics in Washington D.C. I mean, I guess that's just one that you just have to keep up to date on every minute and that. And yeah, I don't know what to say to you other than some of the airport lounges, if you've got priority pass in Lagos, do allow overnight stays if you if that's where it ends up. But let's see. Charles is saying, have you ever met any children of the night in Nuremberg, Germany? He's not Zoom bombing, but he's asking very specific questions that clearly he knows the answer, but we'll all be hopefully laughing as hard as you just are.
So I actually know Charles because our mutual friend Michael Runkle, who I also think has been a guest on this interview, had a birthday party. So that's where I first met Charles. Harris I had known from a Saudi trip. Harris also knows Charles. So that night after Michael's party, we were all walking back to our respective accommodations, and there was a nightclub called Nakind, I think. I'm not saying it correctly in German, so it was translated to Night Child, I think.
Oh,
And so we went to this club together, and I do remember I do remember Charles complaining about his accommodation while
wow.
while they dropped me off in front of a hostel.
Charles is not what sleeping in the back of a Toyota driving around the U.S. That's not gonna.
That's not going to help him with his hip.
We're getting a few different experiences that various ways that Nigerian authorities may claim your visa's expired. So it sounds like,
Oh no.
but it sounds like it can work out or not or whatever. But if you've got it, you've got it. I would guess. I don't know.
I'm hoping somebody can put in the comments and you don't have to read them, like a good way to put a bribe in your passport, underneath your passport. Like somebody has successfully done this, please let me know.
we might have to edit that out of the archives.
And then what amount is appropriate for a bribe?
The grease. I think the phrase you want is a grease payment, which is not a FCPA violation, but
Okay, a grease payment.
yeah,
Yes.
because that's what getting a government off or public servant to perform a service that their duty should be requiring them to do, and you're not corrupting the process because it's the only way to accomplish the task that is perfectly legal is the idea. I've been through lots of FCPA training over the years, so facilitating or grease payment can in some cases be acceptable, but you're not a multinational corporation, so I don't think the authorities will come after you, or at least the American authorities. I wouldn't mess with Norwegian authorities. No, Norwegian. What a slip of the tongue there. Nigerian authority. You've got me. I didn't. I'm just drinking tea, so I can't even begin to blame that. One of the best travel tips I've ever heard, and I see these travel tip lists, and it's like how to roll your socks or fold your things or whatever. But Frequent Travel University in Seattle a few years ago, talking about solo travel and your travels, you talked about packing a rubber door stop, which it's like 99 cents on Amazon or your hardware store. It weighs almost nothing, takes almost no space, and yet it can safely, by putting it in your hotel door, can prevent almost anybody from being able to get in the door. So that's a great tip. Let's talk about that solo travel. Your travels as a woman, solo backpacker. A lot of people, it's a frequent subject. There's lots of different opinions, and it's always great to hear from people how they're living it and doing it.
I love it. I think it really gave me more confidence. I think I'm a confident person, but you really learn to trust yourself and then also trust the people around you and learn to use your intuition. So I really adore solo travel, but as a female, you are subject to attention, and sometimes a lot of times it's unwanted. So it's best to protect yourself. So one of the things that I've carried around is the door stopper, as you've mentioned. If I'm staying in a hotel that's more budget, and I'm not really sure if there's no like inside chain lock, I'll just put the door stopper under just to make myself feel a little bit more comfortable. I mean, there's probably nothing wrong with these accommodations. It's just an extra security. Um, One of the other things that I love about solo travel is that I've stayed in a lot of hostels, and being an extrovert, you just meet a lot of people of varying backgrounds, but you're all interested in this one country, this one place, this one city. You may want to be on a day tour with them. And then, as things go on, people start drinking. So I
Mm.
would, I think one of the things that women or just anyone in general is just to be more cautious about your environment. If you're going to have drinks, probably not go all out. Maybe just have one or two, or whatever you feel comfortable with, until you know the surrounding areas or how to get back to your accommodation or how to order a ride back to your accommodation. I really wouldn't go crazy on drinking until you're a little bit more familiar with your surroundings.
Yeah, I've often felt that if I'm going to do things like that, I'd rather be in my home country where I know the legal system, I know who to call. People know how to get to me. It's that feeling of invincibility you can have overseas can be a dangerous thing, and it seems like a lot of what travelers get into is either driving accidents or a story that begins with midnight and alcohol and other stuff. So do you? But it sounds like you do occasionally drink. Do you have any favorite drinks around the world? They could be non-alcoholic. They could be alcoholic.
Oh, okay. Well,
They don't.
favorite cocktails are caipirinha in Brazil, and I've had really good ones in Angola as well. I like sweet drinks, so I love red wine. So Malbec in Argentina or Uruguay. Um, I think those are probably the top two. I mean, there's also other cocktails that I like, but yeah. Beer. I love Belgian beer and German beer
Ah,
as well. More into the Weiss kind of beers, the wheat beer. So, if anyone wants to drink with me, I'd be very happy to meet with them around the world and share a drink or two or three, depending on how this travel conversation goes.
what have you been drinking there just now? This is a happy hour, so you're perfectly.
I don't have much in my apartment actually. I just have like grape crush right now and water. So I'm just normally bubbly right now.
I think the
Just
key for anybody, if you do get the honor of meeting April on the road, is to treat her to a grape crush, and you'll get the wonderful stories. There's a question here about any hitchhiking stories. I don't know if you hitchhike. Robert is asking about experiences there.
I haven't hitchhiked until very recently. I was
Hmm.
in Sudan with one of my friends, and the day before we had scheduled a day trip to the Meroe pyramids. But unfortunately, by the time we got to the pyramids, because we had seen other attractions, the sun was coming down. And I know the driver was trying to beat sunset, but there just wasn't enough time to fully explore the pyramids. So
Hmm.
I was a little bit disappointed, but I was still happy to see them. But the next day, I had sort of a free day because I knew this was the only thing I really wanted to see outside of Khartoum. And
Hmm.
so I sort of convinced my friend to take the local bus with me back to the pyramids.
Hmm.
So I think the drive is about 2 hours, and the bus ride was obviously longer. And in Africa, nothing is ever on time. So I believe this bus ride probably took 4 or 5 hours. And by the time we had decided that we were going to do this was probably, by the time we got on the bus, maybe it was 11:30. So again, we're trying to race the clock on sun and time here.
Hmm.
Um, but I felt like I had sufficient amount of time then. But we didn't have a way to get back to Khartoum, and I think we were flying out later that night.
And I think people can pull up Google Earth and notice the Meroe pyramids are near nothing in terms of habitation. I mean, this is an incredibly remote place.
So my friend and I decided that we were going to hitchhike. I was a little nervous. He and I had both been to 100 plus countries, but I thought, well, we had met another girl who was randomly in Khartoum at the same time, Anna, and she had just did it too, but I think she did it in smaller segments. So I said, well, maybe if we get to like maybe one small town, maybe we can find somebody else to drive us back to Khartoum. So there was some hope, and it wasn't too dark yet, but the sun was setting. So one truck passes, the other truck passes, and of course, my male friend said, make sure you start waving them down. Like, I'm the one who's supposed to do this, not
Yeah.
him. Okay. So luckily, the third guy stopped for us. And he was so, so, so nice. Obviously, there was a language barrier, but my friend had Google Translate. So we were doing Arabic into English. And we got a ride all the way to Khartoum.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So obviously, this was cut short. He stopped for lunch or meal break, and he offered his meal to us, which I thought was so so nice, so nice. And then at the end, right before Khartoum, I think we might have been just in the suburbs, but like very close into our accommodation. He stopped at the petrol station, and at that time, that was right before they were having a crisis, but that was right before everything started to explode politically. And we said, oh, if you don't mind, you could just like drop us off like right here at the corner. We'll just try to find a taxi. And he got out, he parked his car into the line, got out with us, and like found us a taxi. So like the Sudanese are just so so incredibly wonderful. And for a first time hitchhiking, I would not look back. This was a great experience.
I think Rick on his Counting Countries podcast always asks people the most hospitable country in the world, and I think Sudanese are maybe the only ones who can give Persians a run for their money, and in terms of in terms of the answers we hear. So this is a question from another, I think one of the Philippine Explorers Club members. You can pass on that if you like, but any interesting love stories during your travels?
Pass.
Okay, that's absolutely fair.
I also see that some of the comments during the female interviewees are, "Is she married? Is she?" I don't think this is appropriate, so we
Those
can
are
talk
those
about this in person.
he's a mutual friend of yours. I looked, so I thought maybe there was a specific one that you were planning to answer. So, but yeah, I do filter out all the others that do appear, and I'll usually warn guests that there might be a few marriage proposals. That's the way of the internet. So that's I'm trying to see any of these other. You got the whole peanut gallery of these people, Charles Harris, all these fans. I think I should let them do the job. Is there any closing story that they should have asked me about? That's
Oh my God, I don't know. Why don't we pick a country, and the one that has who says the first country, I'll probably just find a story to end with.
we'll see what they type. I'm curious. I mean, you've got this incredible profile photo that you shared for the group about your trip to Afghanistan. So that I'm absolutely curious.
Okay, let's finish with that one. So I was on a tour to Afghanistan, and one of the last days we visited an NGO called Afghan Circus, and this NGO gave more opportunities to lower socioeconomic Afghan students. So what they do is travel around Afghanistan, and they show their circus tricks, so juggling and whatnot. They've also gone abroad to Europe. So the day that we met, I was the only girl on my tour.
Mm.
And when we went, it was girls' day. So the girls all flocked to me. And this was just a really amazing experience, because I think that if it was boys' day, maybe the boys would have been either shy or not interested and just played with the guys. But having the girls around, and then also I tend to bring stickers at every country, because I feel that if I'm going to see a child that's begging, I'd rather give them a sticker than give them food or money. I know that sounds very cruel, but I also feel like that perpetuates their begging. So giving a sticker is very innocent, and then also just a surprise for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wound up I remember I had the stickers that I brought with me, and I brought them to Afghan Circus, and it was insanity. First, it was like, okay, you get one sticker, you get one sticker, you get one sticker. And then all the girls started crowding around me, and then one was taking it out of my hands and like running around with it, and then the boys on my tour were also running around with the girls. So it actually invited more fun maybe in their day. But as I was leaving, all the girls hugged me, and I was just so touched, because I was already like touched that somebody thought ahead and wanted to give these Afghan children a life, but also extended that opportunity to girls, where at an age, maybe not in Kabul, but definitely in other areas of Afghanistan, they may have not had more education after grade school. So the fact that they're giving them more opportunity, or just showing them that there is something more than their bubble in Kabul, just really struck me. And then to be hugged by these girls because they saw a woman, just it melted my heart. And it's an experience that always stays with me, and like one that I truly like talk about with people about just Afghanistan. That was the one experience that I will always tell people about when I talk about Afghanistan, is the Afghan Circus.
Well, how wonderfully said. And hearing stories such as yours, I felt that it seems like young women travelers might, if they're encouraged to visit places where the perception is that there's very limited women's rights, that the perception that would be not a great place to travel. It seems like for a lot of women travelers, such as yourself, I'm hearing that some of those are the places where you have the opportunity to have the most meaningful interactions and connections with people that as a male traveler myself, I just don't even have a sense of or access to, but that absolutely should not be written off the list or maybe prioritize the country, setting aside safety concerns, but a country like Afghanistan.
I grew up with a very positive role model. My mom was very strong female.
Mhm.
My aunts were very strong females, and then I also went to an all girls high school. So I think
Mhm.
that developed my sense of women empowerment and how important that was. So of course I wanted to go to countries that have this reputation where women are not so empowered. And so to see the difference is very eye-opening to me because I grew up one way, and then to see that they may be limited, but then there are other ways that they can showcase their power
Mhm.
is very fascinating to me.
Mhm. Fantastic. I think we need to have a whole part two on that and in that discussion because it is I mean I've said in other cases my wife and I traveled to Saudi Arabia and I was more interested hearing her stories about the trip we had together than I was about my own trip because every time she stepped off to the bathroom or a different area of a restaurant or different things she experienced so much more than I did. So we'll want to hear more of all your travels. We'll be rooting for you to get that 150 and 193 and all the work. Thank you, all the work you're doing to keep these unruly Americans somewhat healthy during and somewhat sensible during this time.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak today. It's been lovely.
And for everyone, I did put in the comments April's every other week Facebook page where she puts some beautiful posts. So please check that out. And thank you for joining us, April.
Thanks, Stefan. Thanks, EPS.